Marcus and Renee grew up two doors apart. Same town, same graduating class, and for 20 years, close to the same paycheck. The year they both turned 60, their 401k statements were near enough that they joked about it over coffee. Same age, same income. Roughly the same pile of money. 9 years later, Renee is sitting on her porch, fully retired at 69, not checking her account balance every time the market has a rough week. Marcus is back behind a counter, working again at 69, not because he wants to be, but because he has to be. Same starting line, same 5 years of runway to prepare, completely different finish. Here's what didn't cause that gap. It wasn't the stock market. Like, they lived through the same market, the same crashes, the same recoveries. It wasn't luck, and it wasn't some hot investment Renee found and Marcus missed. It came down to a short list of decisions made in a narrow window of years that most people don't even realize they're making until it's too late to redo them. Financial planners sometimes call that window the retirement red zone. Roughly the 5 years before you stop working and the first few years after. It matters because of one simple asymmetry. Earlier in life, a money mistake can be out-earned, out-saved, out-invested over decades. In the red zone, that runway is mostly gone. A bad call here doesn't quietly get corrected by time, it tends to get locked in. Most people walk into these 5 years asking the wrong first question. They want their number, like how much do I need, when do I claim Social Security, how do I cut my taxes? Those questions matter and we'll work through every one of them. But the people who struggle most in retirement usually aren't the ones who miscalculated a number. They're the ones who never built an actual plan. They saved diligently for decades and then arrived at the finish line with a pile of money and no map for turning it into a life. So before touching a single dollar, sit with 3 questions, because these situations happen more often than people admit. What would you do if your employer offered a buyout tomorrow and gave you 2 weeks to decide? What would you do if you were laid off next month and nobody would match your old salary? And would you consider easing into retirement part-time instead of going from full speed to a dead stop? Roughly a third of retirees actually leave work fully on their own timeline. The rest are pushed out early by a layoff, a buyout, or a health problem, their own or someone they love. If any of those questions gave you a jolt, that's useful information. It's telling you why this planning needs to start now, not the week the paperwork lands on your desk. Marcus and Renee both had 5 years left when they sat down separately to figure out what came next. At 5 years out, retirement stops being a someday idea and becomes a project with deadlines. Renee picked an actual date, not sometime around 65, but a specific month, written down and stress tested. That single decision mattered more than it sounds like it should, because almost every other decision, how many more years to save when income turns on, how long the portfolio has to stretch, hangs off that one date. Marcus kept his date vague, telling himself he'd know when the time felt right. Renee also did something most people skip. She built a real retirement budget before she chased a portfolio target. She split future spending into 3 buckets: core needs like housing, food, insurance, and healthcare; lifestyle spending she actually wanted, travel and hobbies; and irregular costs, a roof, a car, a medical surprise. She noticed something people often miss. Some costs drop in retirement, but healthcare tends to climb, so it isn't a simple across-the-board discount. Marcus, meanwhile, focused almost entirely on his account balance, treating a bigger number as the goal in itself rather than pricing out what his actual life would cost to run. Once you know what your life costs, you can check your savings runway honestly. Are you actually on track if you keep doing exactly what you're doing? Some people find they're further ahead than they feared and can ease off. Others find they need to accelerate. At 5 years out, there's still time to act on the answer either way. That's also the year to get honest about risk, and there's a difference between two things that sound similar. Risk tolerance is how much of a market swing you can stomach emotionally. Risk capacity is how much risk your actual plan can afford, given your timeline and spending needs. You might feel bold, but if one bad year would force you to delay retirement or gut your spending, your capacity is lower than your tolerance, and capacity is the one that should win that argument. Before leaving year 5, 3 unglamorous risks quietly wreck plans. Insurance gaps, liability coverage, and health coverage if you're retiring before Medicare eligibility, since one accident can undo decades of saving. Estate basics, plenty of people have no will, no power of attorney, or an ex-spouse still listed as a beneficiary on an old account. And a deliberate debt strategy, because every dollar of required debt payment carried into retirement is a dollar of income you're forced to generate for the rest of your life. Then there's the one almost nobody plans for on purpose: long-term care. Federal research has found that someone who reaches 65 today has roughly a 70% chance of needing some form of long-term care or support before they die. That figure covers a wide range of help, from a few months of assistance after a fall or surgery, to ongoing help at home from a family member, to extended nursing care. It doesn't mean 7 out of 10 people end up in a nursing home for years. A lot of that care happens at home, often from a spouse or an adult child, which makes this a family decision as much as a financial one. Renee looked at her options at 5 years out: a hybrid life and long-term care policy, a traditional long-term care policy, or deliberately choosing to self-insure with dedicated savings. Marcus didn't decide anything. He simply drifted past it, and the cost of insuring against this risk generally rises the longer you wait. 4 years out, the entire game changes. For decades, the goal was accumulation, grow the pile. Now the question flips: how do you turn that pile into a paycheck, and how much of it do you actually keep after taxes? Renee mapped every income source and the age it would switch on: Social Security, any pension, possible part-time work, portfolio withdrawals to fill the gap. Then she did something most savers never do. Instead of only asking how much she had, she asked where it lived, tax-wise. How much sat in pre-tax traditional accounts? How much in Roth? How much in an ordinary taxable brokerage account? Marcus never separated his accounts that way. He looked at one combined total and assumed it behaved the same, regardless of which bucket it came from, which is a very natural assumption, and also an expensive one, because if your savings sit almost entirely in traditional pre-tax accounts, every dollar you withdraw gets taxed as ordinary income. That balance is worth less to you in practice than the number on the screen suggests. This is where a lot of careful savers get an uncomfortable surprise. Required minimum distributions from traditional retirement accounts currently start at age 73 for people born between 1951 and 1959, and at age 75 for anyone born in 1960 or later, under rules set by the Securer 2.0 Act. Those forced withdrawals stack on top of Social Security and can push a retiree into a higher tax bracket than they expected. This is general education, not personalized tax advice. Your own numbers should go through a qualified professional. But the pattern is real, and it's exactly why the years around retirement are prime time to at least model a Roth conversion. There's often a window after leaving work, but before Social Security and RMDs begin, where taxable income temporarily dips. That window can be one of the better times to convert some traditional money to Roth, pay tax on it at a known rate now, and avoid tax on it later. Though whether that trade makes sense depends on your current bracket, your expected future bracket, and how the conversion interacts with things like Medicare premiums. So it's worth running the actual numbers rather than assuming it always helps. There's a tax trap tied to this that almost nobody talks about, and it hits the people who love each other most, sometimes called the widow's or widower's penalty. When one spouse dies, the survivor typically keeps the higher of the two Social Security benefits and loses the smaller one, and the following tax year they file as a single person instead of jointly. Similar bills, but the income tax brackets for a single filer are generally narrower than for a married couple filing jointly, so more of that same income can land in a higher bracket. Couples who only ever modeled the years they'd both be alive can leave the survivor blindsided by the tax bill alone. This is the year to actually run the numbers for what income and taxes look like if one spouse passes first. It's not a cheerful conversation. It's a loving one. And if retirement happens before 65, there's a healthcare bridge to plan for. If you're buying coverage on the ACA marketplace, your premium tax credit depends on your household income relative to the federal poverty line for your household size. And the temporary enhanced subsidies that had applied through 2025 expired at the end of that year. For the 2026 plan year, marketplace premium tax credits are generally available only up to 400% of the federal poverty line. Above that, under current law, a household isn't eligible for a premium tax credit at all, which can mean thousands of extra dollars a year in premiums. Where a household sits relative to that line depends on total income for the year, not any single withdrawal in isolation. But a Roth conversion or a larger portfolio withdrawal, taken late in the year without checking the running total first, is exactly the kind of decision that can push a household over it. One practical bridge worth knowing. After leaving a job, you can typically stay on your former employer's health plan through Cobra for up to 18 months. It isn't the cheapest option, but it buys time to get income and withdrawals sorted before committing to a marketplace plan. I'm John, and if you've made it this far, you already know this is more than a pick a date and hope for the best conversation. If you're finding this useful, go ahead and subscribe. I make videos like this because I want people walking into retirement with their eyes open instead of guessing their way through it. Marcus and Renee are about to hit the year where the gap between them really starts to show. 3 years out, two things matter most: getting Social Security right for the household and defending against the risk that can sink a retirement in its very first act. Most people ask only one Social Security question: when should I claim? That's actually the smaller question. The bigger ones involve household income, survivor protection, and how long you're likely to need the money to last. Renee looked at it as a household decision. For a married couple, both spouses claiming at the exact same age is often not the best fit, though the right approach genuinely depends on each spouse's health, other income, and how much guaranteed income the household wants. In many households, it makes sense for the lower earner to claim earlier, while the higher earner delays, because each year the higher earner waits adds roughly 8% to their eventual benefit up until age 70, and that larger benefit is adjusted for inflation for life, the part that makes it more than a numbers exercise. The higher of the two benefits generally becomes the survivor's ongoing benefit later. Delaying isn't only about buying more income now, it's about protecting whichever spouse ends up living longer. Marcus claimed as soon as he was eligible, mostly because it felt like free money sitting on the table, without modeling what that decision would mean for his household years down the road. Speaking of living longer, it helps not to plan around a generic life expectancy average, because that average gets pulled down by people who never made it to 65 in the first place. Once someone actually reaches 65, government mortality data suggests a man can expect, on average, to live into his early to mid-80s, and a woman somewhat further into her mid to late 80s. And roughly 1 in 4 people who reach 65 today will live past 90. For a married couple, the odds that at least one spouse reaches their 90s are higher still. Planning around a shorter, generic average can leave a retiree without income for a decade they never budgeted for. One warning if you plan to keep working while claiming early: in 2026, if you're under full retirement age for the entire year and you're already collecting, Social Security withholds $1 in benefits for every $2 you earn above $24,480 a year. Full retirement age for anyone born in 1960 or later is 67. That withheld money isn't gone forever. It's factored back in as a higher monthly benefit once you reach full retirement age. But it's a real reason claiming early while working full-time often backfires in the short run. Now, the risk that shapes more first retirements than almost anything else: sequence of returns risk. It has nothing to do with your average return over 30 years. It's entirely about what the market does in the first few years after you start withdrawing. Picture 2 hypothetical retirees, each starting with the same amount and averaging the same return over 20 years. But in a different order, one hits a sharp downturn in year 1, the other hits it in year 15. The one who gets hit early is forced to sell a larger share of a shrunken portfolio just to cover the same spending, locking in that loss in a way the portfolio may never fully recover from, even once the market comes back. The one who gets hit later has already spent down less and has more time for the recovery to help. Same average return, very different outcomes purely because of when the bad years landed. The defense is a cash buffer, and the detail that changes everything is that you only need to cover the gap, not your entire spending. Picture a household spending $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year. If Social Security covers $3,500 of that, the portfolio only has to cover $1,500 a month or $18,000 a year. 3 years of that gap is $54,000, not $180,000. That's the value of knowing your real income stack. Keep that buffer in a high-yield savings account or a money market fund, and when the market drops, spend from the buffer instead of selling stocks at a loss. It isn't a guarantee against every downturn, but it buys time for the portfolio to recover instead of forcing a sale at the worst possible moment. Marcus didn't have one. 2 years out, that gap was still theoretical to him. 2 years out, all of this turns into an actual paycheck. Draft the first 24 months of cash flow, month by month. Total spending, guaranteed income, and the gap the portfolio has to fill. 2 full years, not one, because a single month hides the seasonal stuff. Insurance premiums, a big trip, a surprise expense. Renee decided precisely which account would fund which dollar, not "I'll pull from investments," but exactly which withdrawals would come from taxable accounts, which from traditional, and which, if any, from Roth. She thought about income in layers, a floor of guaranteed income like Social Security at the bottom, part-time work above that if wanted, portfolio withdrawals above that, and her own flexibility to trim discretionary spending in a rough year sitting at the very top. Marcus, by contrast, had never modeled a floor. He assumed his portfolio would simply generate whatever he needed whenever he needed it, an assumption that works fine until the market has an opinion about it. 1 year out, the goal is confidence, not new strategy. The big decisions are already made. This is the year for a genuine dry run. Living on the projected retirement budget while still collecting a paycheck, sometimes literally moving the extra income into a separate account so it's out of sight. Renee ran hers and found her numbers held up. Marcus ran his and discovered his actual lifestyle cost more than he'd budgeted for. The dry run was uncomfortable, but it caught the shortfall while he still had a paycheck to fix it with. He adjusted some spending and pushed his date back slightly. It wasn't the outcome he wanted, but it was far better than finding out after he'd already quit. There's one more piece that has nothing to do with money, and it may matter as much as any of the numbers. People who pour every ounce of energy into the financial plan and nothing into the rest of life sometimes feel strangely lost within the first few months of retiring. The difference between people who thrive and people who struggle emotionally is almost never the size of the portfolio. It's whether they retired towards something or just away from something. It's worth testing a hobby, trying a volunteer role, reconnecting with something set aside decades ago, and writing down an honest answer to one question. What will you finally get to do in retirement that you can't do now? Both of them retired at 65, within a few months of each other, just like they'd planned 5 years earlier. The first year was loud emotionally for both. Spending felt strange. Headlines felt louder. Markets did what markets do. Renee watched 3 things closely: actual spending against the plan, actual taxes against the projection, and the portfolio against her own emotions. When things drifted, she made small adjustments. Marcus's plan had less margin built in from the start, a thinner cash buffer, more of his savings concentrated in accounts that taxed every withdrawal as ordinary income, a Social Security decision that locked in a smaller lifetime benefit, and a budget that had already run tight in the dry run. When the market went through a rough stretch a couple of years into retirement, Marcus had less cushion to absorb it and started drawing down his portfolio faster than it could recover. By 69, the math no longer worked, and he went back to a job to close the gap. None of it was one dramatic mistake, it was several ordinary ones, made or avoided in the same handful of years. This has been general financial education, not personalized financial tax or legal advice, and none of it guarantees a particular outcome. Markets, health, and personal circumstances all vary. Before making any major moves, sit down with a qualified professional who knows your full situation. Marcus and Renee started in the same place, with the same amount of time to prepare. What separated them wasn't a market call or a lucky break. It was a handful of ordinary decisions made deliberately in the years before either of them stopped working, instead of improvised under pressure afterward. You've spent 30 or 40 years building the pile. The last 5 years are the ones where it's worth slowing down and actually planning rather than winging it. If you take one thing from this, find out what your actual life costs to run, because Social Security, taxes, Roth conversions, and healthcare decisions all flow from that one number. If this helped bring your own retirement into focus, subscribe and stick around. I'll keep walking through these decisions one video at a time, because retirement security isn't built in a single leap. It's built one decision at a time.